The kitchen was my sanctuary, a place where flour-dusted countertops and the hum of an old oven wove stories of love and memory. At 68, I'd spent decades perfecting recipes passed down from my mother, her mother, and hers before that. Each dish was a thread in the tapestry of our family, a legacy I cherished. My son, Daniel, grew up in this kitchen, his small hands once kneading dough beside mine, his laughter filling the air as we baked bread or simmered sauces. Those were the days when life felt whole, when the world was just the two of us and the warmth of home. Now, Daniel was 32, married to Claire, a woman whose sharp edges seemed to cut through everything I held dear. They lived in the city, a 2-hour drive from my modest home in the countryside, where the hills rolled green and the air carried the scent of pine. I'd always hoped for a daughter-in-law who'd feel like family, someone to share recipes and stories with. But Claire was different. She was polished, her life a curated gallery of Instagram posts and modern minimalism. She'd breeze into my home with her designer bags and tight smiles, her eyes scanning my outdated furniture with barely concealed disdain. It was a Sunday in late autumn when the incident happened. The leaves outside my window burned crimson and gold, and I'd spent the morning preparing a feast for Daniel and Claire's visit. The table was set with my best linens, the ones my mother embroidered decades ago. I'd made pot roast, the kind Daniel loved as a boy, with carrots and potatoes simmered in a rich, savory broth. There was fresh cornbread, golden and warm, and an apple pie cooling on the counter, its cinnamon scent curling through the house like a hug. When they arrived, Daniel hugged me tightly, his familiar warmth easing the ache in my heart. Claire, though, offered a cool peck on my cheek, her perfume sharp and expensive. "Smells rustic," she said, her tone clipped as she glanced at the kitchen. I brushed it off, used to her little jabs. Dinner was served, and I watched Daniel's eyes light up as he took a bite of the roast. "Just like I remember, Mom," he said, his voice soft with nostalgia. Claire, however, pushed her food around her plate, her fork barely touching the meal. "It's a bit heavy, isn't it?" she said, her voice loud enough to carry. "I mean, all this butter and grease. It's not exactly healthy." Her words landed like a slap, though her smile stayed in place. Sharp and deliberate, Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to me. But I kept my composure, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "Healthy's important," I said, my voice steady despite the sting. "But sometimes food's about more than that. It's about love, about family." Claire raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into something too calculated to be a smile. "Sure, if you're into that whole nostalgic thing. I just think cooking should evolve. You know, like plant-based, or at least lighter. This is a bit old-fashioned." The word hung in the air, heavy as the grease she'd mocked. Old-fashioned. It wasn't just about the food. It was Mimi home, my life, my love for my son. I felt the weight of her judgment, the way it dismissed everything I'd built. Daniel tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. The rest of the meal passed in strained silence, the pie untouched, the cornbread crumbling on the table. That night, after they left, I stood alone in my kitchen, the dishes piled high, the air still thick with the scent of dinner. I stared at the pot roast, now cold, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not exactly, but a quiet resolve. Claire thought my cooking was outdated, a relic of a simpler time. She thought she could waltz into my world and reduce it to a single word. But I'd spent a lifetime perfecting my craft, pouring my heart into every dish. If she wanted to challenge that, I'd show her what my cooking could do. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the steam curling like a plan taking shape. Claire's words had lit a fire in me, not of vengeance, but of purpose. I'd invite them back for another dinner, one that would speak louder than her mockery. I'd serve her a meal she'd never forget, one that would force her to see Minute as an outdated mother-in-law, but as a woman with a story worth telling. I called Daniel and suggested another dinner the following weekend. "Bring Claire," I said, my voice warm but firm. "I'm trying something new." He hesitated, likely sensing the tension from the last visit, but agreed. As I hung up, I pulled out my old recipe book, its pages yellowed and stained with years of love. This wasn't about proving Claire wrong. It was about showing her what she'd dismissed, what she'd failed to understand. I'd cook a meal that would tell my story. And maybe, just maybe, it would reach her heart. The week passed in a blur of preparation. I didn't just want to cook. I wanted to create. I chose dishes that meant something, recipes that carried the weight of my life, my struggles, my joys. There'd be no pot roast this time. No heavy, comfort food for Claire to sneer at. Instead, I'd craft a menu that was light, vibrant, and undeniably modern, but rooted in the soul of my family's traditions. I'd show her that my cooking wasn't stuck in the past, it was timeless. By Friday, my kitchen was alive with color and scent. I'd sourced fresh herbs from my garden, tomatoes still warm from the sun, and local cheeses from the farmer's market. The menu was set, a starter of heirloom tomato salad with basil and burrata, a main course of herb-crusted chicken with roasted vegetables, and a dessert of lavender honey panna cotta. Each dish was a nod to my roots, but presented in a way that even Claire's polished tastes couldn't dismiss. As I chopped and stirred, I thought of my mother, her hands guiding mine as we cooked together. I thought of Daniel, his childhood laughter echoing in this very room. And I thought of Claire, her sharp words and sharper judgments. This dinner wasn't just about food. It was about legacy, about love, about proving that the heart of a home could never be outdated. The day of the dinner arrived, crisp and golden, with autumn's chills settling over the countryside. I woke early, my nerves buzzing with anticipation. The kitchen smelled of fresh basil and lavender, the counters lined with ingredients I'd spent days preparing. This wasn't just a meal. It was a statement, a bridge I hoped to build between Claire's world and mine. I wanted her to taste the love in every bite, to see that my cooking wasn't a relic, but a living, breathing part of who I was. Daniel and Claire arrived at dusk, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. Daniel's smile was warm, but Claire's was guarded, her eyes scanning the house as if expecting another rustic disappointment. I welcomed them with a hug, ignoring the slight stiffness in Claire's embrace. "Something smells good," Daniel said, his voice hopeful, and I caught a flicker of curiosity in Claire's expression, though she didn't speak. I led them to the dining room, where the table was set with care. No embroidered linens, this time just simple, elegant white plates and a centerpiece of wildflowers I'd picked that morning. The heirloom tomato salad waited, vibrant and fresh, the burrata glistening under a drizzle of olive oil. I served it with a smile, watching Claire's reaction closely. She took a small bite, her fork hesitant, then paused. "This is nice," she said, her tone neutral but lacking the usual edge. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As we moved to the main course, I brought out the herb-crusted chicken, its golden crust fragrant with rosemary and thyme, the roasted vegetables, zucchini, bell peppers, and baby carrots were arranged like a painter's palette, their colors bright against the white plates. Daniel dug in eagerly, his compliments warming my heart. Claire ate slowly, her expression unreadable, but she didn't push the food around her plate this time. I took it as a small victory. The conversation was light at first, centered on Daniel's work and Claire's latest projectum marketing campaign for some trendy startup. But as the meal progressed, I steered it towards stories of my childhood, of Sundays spent cooking with my mother. I spoke of her hands, calloused but gentle, teaching me to knead dough, to season with intuition rather than measurement. Food was how we showed love, I said, my voice soft but steady. It wasn't just about eating. It was about coming together, about remembering who we are. Claire listened. Her fork paused midair. For the first time, I saw something shift in her eyes: curiosity, maybe, or the faintest hint of understanding. Daniel smiled, his hand reaching for mine under the table. A silent thank you for the memories I was sharing. I didn't push further, letting the food speak for itself. The panna cotta came next, its creamy texture infused with the delicate sweetness of lavender and honey. Claire took a bite, and her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise she couldn't hide. "This is different," she said, her voice softer now, almost thoughtful. "Where did you learn to make this?" I smiled, sensing an opening. "It's a new recipe," I said, inspired by my mother. But I tweaked it to feel a little more modern. I let the word hang, a gentle nod to her earlier criticism. She didn't respond, but she took another bite, and I felt a spark of hope. After dinner, Daniel helped clear the plates, his chatter filling the silence as Claire lingered at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. "You put a lot of work into this," she said finally, her tone less guarded than before. "It's not what I expected." There was no apology in her words, but there was something else: a crack in her armor, a glimpse of respect. I nodded, keeping my voice warm. "I wanted to share something special with you both. Food's always been my way of doing that." As they prepared to leave, Daniel hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're amazing, Mom." Claire's goodbye was quieter, her smile less forced than usual. "Thanks for dinner," she said, and though it was simple, it felt like a step forward. I watched their car disappear down the gravel road, the night air cool against my skin. The dinner had been a success, but I knew this was only the beginning. Claire's walls were still high, and one meal, no matter how perfect, wouldn't tear them down. The next morning, I sat with my coffee, replaying the evening. Claire's words, her surprise, her softened tone stayed with me. She'd tasted my story, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. But I wasn't done. I wanted her to see more, to feel the weight of the traditions she'd dismissed. I decided to invite them again, this time for a holiday gathering, a chance to go bigger, to show her the heart of my kitchen in its fullest glory. I spent the next few weeks planning, diving deeper into my recipe book. This time, I'd weave in dishes from my mother's holiday feast recipes that had brought our family together through joy and loss. There'd be a roasted turkey with sage stuffing, cranberry sauce made from scratch, and a pecan pie that had been my father's favorite. But I'd add my own touches, lighter and fresher, to meet Claire halfway. I wanted her to see that my cooking could evolve without losing its soul. As I planned, I thought about Claire not as an adversary, but as someone who'd never known the kind of love my kitchen held. Maybe her polished life, her curated world, was her way of building something meaningful. Maybe she just didn't know how to connect with mine. I didn't want to shame her or prove her wrong. I wanted to invite her in, to show her that my table had room for her, too. By the time the holiday dinner approached, my kitchen was ready, filled with the scents of sage, cinnamon, and hope. I wasn't just cooking for Daniel and Claire. I was cooking for the family we could be, if only we could find a way to meet in the middle. Winter settled over the countryside, blanketing the hills in frost and turning my breath to mist as I gathered ingredients for the holiday dinner. The house felt alive with anticipation, the kitchen a warm cocoon against the December chill. I'd spent weeks planning this meal, each dish a careful balance of tradition and innovation, designed to bridge the gap between my world and Claire's. This wasn't just about proving a point, Anna Maria, it was about building something. A connection I hoped would last. The menu was ambitious. A roasted turkey with sage and chestnut stuffing, cranberry sauce with a hint of orange zest, mashed sweet potatoes with a touch of maple, and a pecan pie with a bourbon glaze. My modern twist on my father's favorite. I'd also added a kale and pomegranate salad, vibrant and fresh, a nod to Claire's preference for lighter fare. Every dish carried a piece of my story, but I'd shaped them to speak her language. 2. Daniel and Claire arrived on a snowy evening, the headlights of their car cutting through the dusk. Daniel's grin was wide as he stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. "Smells like Christmas, Mom," he said, pulling me into a hug. Claire followed, her expression softer than before, though her eyes still held that guarded edge. She carried a bottle of wine, a gesture that surprised me. "Thought it might go with dinner," she said, handing it over. I thanked her, feeling a flicker of warmth. Maybe she was trying. 2. The dining room glowed with candlelight. The table set with simple, elegant white plates, linen napkins, and a centerpiece of pine cones and holly. I served the kale salad first, its ruby-red pomegranate seeds catching the light. Claire took a bite, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "This is really good," she said, her tone genuine. Daniel beamed, and I felt a quiet thrill. The turkey came next, golden and fragrant, surrounded by vegetables roasted to caramelized perfection. The stuffing was rich with chestnuts, a recipe my mother had perfected during lean years when love was the only abundance. As we ate, I shared stories of past holidays, how my mother would sing while she cooked, her voice carrying through the house, how my father would sneak bites of pie before dinner, grinning like a child. Daniel laughed, adding his own memories of helping me stuff the turkey as a boy, his hands sticky with sage. Claire listened, her face softening as the meal went on. "Your family sounds close," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Mine wasn't like that. It was the first time she'd offered anything personal, and I seized the moment. "What were your holidays like?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her fork. "Quiet," she said finally. "My parents were busy. We didn't do big dinners. It was usually just takeout and a movie." There was no self-pity in her voice, just a matter-of-fact distance that made my heart ache. I saw her then, not as the polished woman who'd mocked my cooking, but as someone who'd never known the warmth of a family table. The pecan pie was the final touch, its bourbon glaze adding a sophisticated edge to the familiar sweetness. Claire took a small bite, then another, her eyes closing briefly. "This is incredible," she said, and there was no trace of her usual sharpness. I smiled, my chest tight with emotion. "It was my father's favorite," I said. "He used to say pie was proof that life could be sweet, even when it was hard." Claire nodded, her gaze distant. For the first time, I felt like she was truly present, not just physically but emotionally. The rest of the evening passed in a warm haze, with Daniel telling stories and Claire chiming in, her laughter rare but real. When they left, she hugged Maya, a real hug, not the stiff, perfunctory kind. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. This was special. As I cleaned the kitchen that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. Claire hadn't apologized for her earlier words, but she didn't need to. Her presence at my table, her willingness to share a piece of herself, was enough. I realized then that this wasn't about changing her or proving her wrong. It was about inviting her into my world, showing her that my kitchen heart had room for her, too. But the journey wasn't over. A few days later, Daniel called. his voice hesitant. "Claire's been talking about your cooking," he said. "She wants to learn. She asked if you'd teach her one of your recipes." My heart skipped a beat. It was a small request, but it felt monumental, a crack in the wall she'd built. A chance to build something new. I invited them back the following weekend, this time for a cooking lesson. I chose a simple recipe, my mother's herb bread, a staple of our family's table. It was forgiving, tactile, a dish that required heart more than precision. When they arrived, Claire seemed nervous, her usual confidence replaced by a quiet uncertainty. "I've never really cooked," she admitted, tying on an apron. "I don't want to mess this up." "You won't," I said, handing her a bowl of flour. "Cooking's like life. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up." We worked side by side, kneading dough, the rhythm of our hands falling into sync. Daniel watched, his smile wide, as Claire laughed at her flour-dusted hands. For the first time, I saw her not as my son's wife, but as a woman searching for connection, just like I was. The kitchen was alive with the scent of yeast and herbs as Claire and I worked on the bread. Her hands, usually so poised, fumbled with the dough, but there was a spark in her eyes, curiosity I hadn't seen before. Daniel sat at the counter, sipping coffee and offering playful commentary, his presence a steady anchor. I guided Claire through each step, showing her how to knead with purpose, how to feel when the dough was ready. "It's like a heartbeat," I said, pressing my hands into the soft mound. "You'll know when it's alive." She nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. For the first time, I saw her without her armorno sharp remarks. No guarded smiles. Just Claire, her sleeves rolled up, flour smudging her cheek, trying to learn something new. It was a small moment, but it felt like a turning point. As the bread baked, filling the house with warmth, we sat together, the three of us, talking about nothing and everything. Claire asked about my mother, about the recipes I'd learned as a girl, and I shared stories I hadn't told in years. "My mom wasn't much of a cook," Claire said, her voice soft. "She was always working, always stressed. I guess I never learned what a kitchen could be." Her words were simple, but they carried weight, a glimpse into the life that had shaped her. I realized then that her mockery, her distance, wasn't about me. It was about her own emptiness, her own longing for something she'd never had. When the bread was done, golden and fragrant, we broke it apart, the crust crackling under our fingers. Claire took a bite, her eyes widening. "I made this?" she asked, almost disbelieving. Daniel laughed, clapping her on the back. "You're a natural," he said, and I saw the pride in his eyes, not just for the bread, but for her effort, her willingness to try. That day marked a shift. Claire started calling more, asking for tips on simple dishes, her voice brighter each time. I sent her recipes, each one a piece of my heart, and she'd text back photos of her attempts, sometimes lopsided, but always earnest. Slowly, she began to open up, sharing bits of her life, her demanding job, her fears of not being enough, her hope to build a family with Daniel someday. I listened, offering advice when she asked, but mostly just being there, a steady presence in her uncertain world. Months passed, and our cooking lessons became a ritual. Claire would drive up, sometimes alone, sometimes with Daniel, and we'd spend hours in the kitchen, laughing over spilled flour or debating the perfect amount of time. She was still sharp, still polished, but there was a warmth now, a willingness to meet me halfway. One afternoon, as we rolled out dough for cinnamon rolls, she paused, her hands still. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for what I said about your cooking. I didn't understand what it means to you." I froze, my heart catching. I'd never expected an apology, never needed one. But her words, raw and honest, were a gift. "You're here now?" I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That's what matters." She nodded, her eyes glistening, and we went back to the dough. The silence between us warm and full. As spring bloomed, Claire suggested hosting a family dinner at their city apartment. "I want to cook," she said, her voice a mix of nerves and excitement. "Will you help me plan it?" I agreed, thrilled by her enthusiasm. We spent days designing a menu, blending my recipes with her audacious fusion of our worlds. She wanted to make my mother's herb bread, but with a twist, a rosemary garlic butter to serve alongside it. I loved her creativity, the way she was making the recipe her own. The night of the dinner, I arrived at their sleek, modern apartment, a far cry from my cozy farmhouse. The table was set with care, Claire's touches evident in the minimalist plates and fresh flowers. She'd cooked everything herself, with Daniel as her sous chef, and the pride on her face was undeniable. The bread was perfect, its crust golden, its center soft and fragrant. The main coursey lemon herb chicken with roasted asparagus was light and flavorful, a nod to her tastes but infused with the heart of my kitchen. As we ate, Claire shared her own stories, her voice steady but emotional. She spoke of her childhood, of meals eaten alone, of a mother too busy to teach her how to cook. "This is what I always wanted," she said, gesturing to the table. "To us. A family. A home." Daniel reached for her hand, his eyes soft, and I felt tears prick my own. This was what I'd hoped for, not just a meal, but a moment of connection. A new chapter for us all. The dinner stretched late into the night, laughter and conversation flowing freely. Claire wasn't just my daughter-in-law anymore. She was family. Her place at my table earned not through perfection, but through effort, through love. The months that followed were a quiet unfolding, like petals opening to the sun. Claire and I grew closer, our bond forged in the kitchen but stretching beyond it. She'd call to share small victories and new recipes she'd nailed, a promotion at work or to ask for advice on life, not just cooking. I cherished these moments, the way she trusted me with her vulnerabilities. Daniel noticed it, too, his gratitude evident in the way he'd hug me a little tighter, his eyes saying what words didn't need to. But life, like any recipe, isn't always predictable. In early summer, Claire called me late one night, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "And I'm terrified." I listened as she poured out her fears about motherhood, about balancing her career, about being enough for the child growing inside her. I remembered those same fears from decades ago, when I was pregnant with Daniel. And I told her so. "You don't have to be perfect," I said. "You just have to love them. The rest comes with time." She came to visit the next weekend, just the two of us. We sat in my garden, the air heavy with the scent of roses, and talked for hours. She confessed how much she admired my strength, my ability to create a home that felt safe and warm. "I want that for my child," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "But I don't know how." I took her hand, my heart swelling. "You're already learning," I said. "Every time you cook, every time you show up, you're building that home." We spent the summer preparing, not just for the baby, but for the family we were becoming. Claire threw herself into cooking, determined to master recipes she could pass down to her child. I taught her my mother's chicken soup, the kind that had soothed Daniel through countless colds, and she added her own twist, a hint of ginger for warmth. We laughed over her early attempts, the broth sometimes too salty, the noodles overcooked, but each mistake was a step forward, a lesson in resilience. As her belly grew, so did her confidence. She started hosting small dinners at their apartment, inviting friends and colleagues, proudly serving dishes we'd perfected together. I'd drive up to help, standing side by side with her in their tiny kitchen, our hands moving in sync. Daniel would watch, his grin wide, and I'd catch him whispering to Claire, "You're amazing," his voice thick with pride. But there were moments of doubt, too. One evening, as we chopped vegetables for a stew, Claire's hands stilled. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she asked, her voice small. "What if I can't give my child what you gave Daniel?" I set down my knife, meeting her eyes. "You will," I said firmly. "Because you're trying. Because you care. That's what makes a home not perfection, but love." By autumn, Claire was glowing, her confidence tempered by a quiet strength. She and Daniel invited me to their apartment for a special dinner. Once she insisted on cooking alone. "I want to show you something," she said, her voice bright with excitement. When I arrived, the table was set with familiar Duchesne mother's herb bread, the lemon herb chicken, a pecan pie with her own lavender twist. But there was something new, too, a small dish of roasted chickpeas, spiced with cumin and paprika, a recipe she'd created herself. "I wanted to make something that was mine," she said, her eyes shining. "But it's because of you that I could." I tasted the chickpeas, their warmth and spice a perfect blend of bold and comforting. They were Claire vibrant, unexpected, but rooted in the love we'd built together. I hugged her tightly, tears in my eyes. "You've made it your own," I said, "and it's perfect." That night, as we ate and laughed, I saw the family we'd become. Claire wasn't just my daughter-in-law. She was my partner, my friend, a woman who'd taken my recipes and made them her own. Daniel watched us, his eyes soft, and I knew he felt it, too, the love that had grown, not just between him and Claire, but between all of us. As I drove home under a starlit sky, I thought of my mother, of the kitchen that had held us together through joy and sorrow. I'd pass that legacy to Claire, not just through recipes, but through the courage to try, to fail, to love. She'd mocked my cooking once, but now she carried it forward, adding her own flavors, her own story. And in that, I found a joy deeper than any recipe could hold. Winter returned, bringing with it the soft anticipation of new life. Claire was due in early spring, and the months leading up to the birth were a flurry of preparation. She and Daniel moved into a bigger apartment, one with a nursery painted in soft greens and yellows. I helped them decorate, hanging curtains and folding tiny clothes, each moment a reminder of the family we were building. Claire's confidence grew, but so did her reliance on Minute just for recipes, but for the quiet wisdom of experience. One snowy afternoon, as we sat in my kitchen sipping tea, Claire pulled out a notebook. "I've been writing down your recipes," she said, flipping through pages filled with her neat handwriting. "I want my child to know them, to know you." My heart swelled at her words. The notebook wasn't just a collection of dishes, it was a bridge, a way to carry my mother's legacy, my legacy, into the future. We spent that winter cooking together, perfecting recipes for the days when Claire would be too tired to think about dinner. I taught her freezer-friendly meals, lasagna, hearty soups, casseroles that could be reheated with ease. She soaked it all in, her enthusiasm infectious. "I want my kid to grow up like Daniel did," she said one day, her hands resting on her belly, "with a kitchen that feels like home." When the baby arrived, a girl, named Lily after my mother, the hospital room was filled with light and love. Claire held her daughter, her face a mix of exhaustion and wonder, while Daniel stood beside her, his eyes brimming with tears. I stood back, giving them space, but Claire reached for my hand. "You're part of this," she said, her voice steady. "You're her family, too." The first time they brought Lily to my house, I cooked a simple meal chicken soup, herb bread, a small apple tart. Claire helped. Lily cradled in a sling against her chest, and we moved through the kitchen with ease. Our rhythm natural now. Daniel watched, his smile wide, and I saw the future in that moment, a table surrounded by family, by love, by the food that had brought us together. As Lily grew, Claire and I continued our cooking lessons, now with a tiny audience. Lily would giggle from her high chair, her hands reaching for bits of dough or a taste of mashed sweet potato. Claire was a natural mother, her fears replaced by a fierce, quiet love. She'd sing to Lily as we cooked, her voice soft but sure, and I'd hear echoes of my mother in her melodies. One evening, as we prepared a holiday feast for the three of us and little Lily, Claire turned to me, her eyes serious. "I was wrong about you," she said. "About your cooking. About everything. I thought it was simple. But it's so much more. It's love. It's history. It's home." Her words were a balm, healing wounds I hadn't realized still lingered. I hugged her, Lily squirming between us, and felt the weight of her words settle in my heart. The dinner that night was a celebration not just of the holiday, but of us. The table was crowded with dishes we'd made together, my mother's stuffing, Claire's spiced chickpeas, a pie we perfected side by side. We laughed and ate, Lily's babbling a joyful soundtrack. And I realized that this was what I'd always wanted, a family that shared not just food, but love, respect, and understanding. Years later, when Lily was old enough to stand at the counter, her small hands kneading dough beside mine, I saw the cycle complete. Claire was there, too, guiding Lily's hands, her laughter filling the kitchen just as Daniel's once had. My cooking, once mocked, had become the heartbeat of our family, a legacy that stretched from my mother to me, to Claire, and now to Lily. As I watched them, I thought of that first dinner, of Claire's sharp words and my quiet resolve. I'd served her a taste of regret, not through vengeance, but through love, through meals that told my story, through a table that welcomed her in. She'd tasted it, not just in the food, but in the life we'd built together. And in that, I found a joy that no recipe could capture, a love that would never fade.